Awesome. All right, we're recording, and I'm with Katlyn Duncan, who I've done so much together with. I actually consider you a friend, so
Oh,
it's funny to have you on the podcast. And I was when you signed on, I was like, "Have you been on the podcast before?" Because we've spent so much time together. It feels weird that you haven't. So that's strange. So I'm going to give an introduction to you and tell everybody who you are. You are the ghost writer of over 40 books, which is crazy to me. You have two series out under your own name and then four standalone novels under your own name too. Did I get all that right?
I think so, yeah.
Awesome. And then you're also a master of YouTube. And I love watching your YouTube videos. I just watched I think it's like 2 weeks old. I'm like so far back in the weeds, but I was just watching your Clifton Strengths Finder one today, where you like process your own strengths and how they apply to your writing. I thought that was fantastic. It's a really great video. So,
Thank
Katlyn
you.
Duncan, author, is who you are on YouTube, and you just started doing a Hive Writers episode every once in a while,
Hmm.
which was fun too.
Yeah.
Um, so what should people know about your YouTube?
My YouTube?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's a lot of fun. I like to talk about writing tips and tricks and publishing. And, with my writer strengths, I started working on that last year in 2020
Yeah.
because I was in total burnout. And this book that we're working on is like my coming out of burnout book.
Nice.
It holds a special place. But yeah, I love writer strengths, and I wish I could talk about it more and more and more because I do
Yeah.
it all day long
Well, people
with
can
some of
go
my
watch the
friends.
video on YouTube because it's fantastic. I just felt it's really I looked mine up. I did like Strengths Finder stuff back in like early 2000s when the book
Mhm,
first came out, but I did it for like the office team I was working for, and it was like,
mhm,
how do we relate to each other? So I picked it back up this year. Because I'd never actually like applied it to my own efforts and like how does it work
mm.
for me? Like that was a weird. I was like, oh, A, I don't know why I didn't do that, and B, I'm not sure like how that works. So it was really great to hear somebody else kind of process it and talk through like how that happened. And
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a big community, and it's but since I've been publishing since 2013, like I don't ever feel like there's something new to like learn, like
yeah,
in terms of craft or like something extra. And I feel like with Becca Syme, that was like an explosion. And then like working with you, it just like added just so much more this past year for like
thanks.
my craft and my mindset and everything. So yeah.
Yeah, you can put my name in a sentence with Becca Sign any day. I'll just if I could just like walk in her shadow for a little bit, that would be
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, so let's look at the piece you sent. So first off, I'm going to share my screen because I
Yeah.
got it up. I loved it. I was super into it.
Oh, good, good.
Um, yeah, it's such a fun story. It's a really great premise. This felt like a chapter two. Is that
It's a little further in
okay?
because what I wanted to work on is, I told you up front, just because I wrote this prior
Yeah,
to working with you. So I feel like there's a lot of things that we've worked on, but I was just curious if you know, I don't know, just in terms of just figuring out what I could do better.
yeah, sure. So there's three things I want to talk about in the piece, and then two things in general. So,
Okay.
I want to look at slowing down in some places, which you and I have talked about before. That
Yeah.
I feel like I'm constantly telling myself and all other writers in the world, slow down.
Yeah.
So slowing down, I want to talk about building strategic relationships. So you're fantastic at this, and I'm just gonna kind of like take the moment to pick your brain on it.
Oh.
And then I want to talk about first person POV because dialogue in first person POV can be really tricky.
Hmm.
Uh, you do a really great job of it. So I think just having a conversation about it will be beneficial for you and for all the listeners too, or watchers if we're on YouTube. I'm always confused as to who I'm talking to. That has nothing to do with anybody listening or watching. That's just my inability to keep all the tech waves in my head.
Yeah.
And then we need to talk about writing authority figures, because you've got a scene with a cop at the end.
Hmm.
And I think I think that's where I was like, oh, this could be a lot stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And teenagers as well, like the teenage voice. So besides those 5 things, is there anything else you want to toss into that mix?
Not yet. No.
Okay,
I'm
awesome.
just excited to dive
Yeah.
in.
Okay, so let's start with the more technical stuff first, and then get to like the larger voice conversation. So here you have this strong opening paragraph. Your uh, Jenny, your main character, and whose first person point of view, wakes up in bed, and she hears a truck coming, and she has this kind of like moment of comfort because she knows who the truck belongs to. And then as she's having this moment of comfort, we have this paragraph: a vision creeps over me. What if there was someone dangerous in the house? I watch a shadowy figure attack Scott before a pinch in my palm brings me back to the present. I count down from 5 for good measure to exhale. So here you've got this like shift in tone
Mhm.
that if it was just a passing thing, like that didn't play into the characterization of Jenny, I'd just say like cut it, right? Like,
Mhm.
but this tension between kind of her reality and her visions and what those visions do to her reality and like the fear that comes with them really plays into who she is. So I want more here. Like I want to be able to experience this vision with her.
Okay.
What happens when we summarize like this? So I would call this a summary paragraph where you're telling us what's happening and not showing us what's happening. And summary paragraphs can be super useful if we're moving the character through a scene that doesn't matter.
Mhm.
It has nothing to do with, you know, like if we're just transferring the character from one setting to another, there's nothing we're going to learn about that character in that transfer. There's nothing that's going to, further the plot in that transfer. There's nothing fun that's going to happen in that transfer. Then a summary is fine. But here, like this is key to who she is.
Right.
And the like countdown from 5 for a good measure to exhale. I almost want to see her do that. I want to see her say like, 1, breathe in and breathe out. And I can feel my pulse still racing. 2, my pulse start, my pulse. Oh, sorry, 5, 4, my pulse
Mhm.
starts to slow. 3, like I want to experience that with her. So when we zoom in, what the reason to zoom is to get that like characterization out and to really give the user that like give the reader that like tangible experience without like grabbing onto this scene and really grabbing hold of it. How does that feel?
It feels good. She does do that in other parts of the book. Um, because it's like her coping mechanism for when she's like
Okay.
amped up and she's experiencing something. But that's a good point to if I can do it a little differently every time, it just becomes part of it, part of the story. And I don't think I need to summarize that. Like
Yeah, and I like I focused on that last sentence. Really, the more important sentence, the more important part to zoom into me is a vision creeps over me.
Mhm.
I want to know what that's like, right? Like I want to know like suddenly I saw myself seeing Scott open the front door and a shadowy figure um, standing behind him as he called my name. He moves to the steps. The shadowy figure comes behind him. I watch as the shadowy figure grabs him from behind, strangling him, and as the light starts to go out of Scott's eyes,
Mhm.
or like he screams my name, why am I not there? Why am I not moving? And as the light starts to go out of his eyes, I pinch my palm to bring myself back to the present, right? Like just adding those like 4 or 5 additional sentences
Yeah.
can make that vision come to life. And makes us, and so the reason, sorry, going back to I'm all scattered this morning.
It's okay.
As if you're like, Jeff, you're always scattered.
It's fine.
The reason, I want to do it here specifically and with the vision specifically is because there is that change in emotional tone that impacts how she comes downstairs, right? Like,
Mm.
so if she's just hearing a comforting truck and waking up, she's going to come downstairs like excited and happy. But she comes downstairs and we immediately have her guarded and like protective. of kind of he's fixing the sink and she's protective of what's happening. She's had a vision about the sink earlier. So it's that kind of um, guardedness that gets set up by this vision she has upstairs that creates a really great kind of emotional through line for what's going to happen when she comes downstairs. So yeah, so that was my first kind of note is like
No.
let's get in there tight
Yeah.
and like really like touch and feel that moment. Okay, let's talk about strategic relationships. So talk to me. Scott comes in to fix the drain
Mhm.
and Jenny is kind of standing next to him. Talk to me about their relationship. What are you hoping to what were you hoping to get out of that?
Um, I think with everyone, because she's in a different town, she's staying in a house they're supposed to sell. It's a legacy home. So she's meeting all of these people. And in terms of, because it's like a suspense thriller, like I do want to have the reader expectation of suspecting everyone, but I also want Jenny to be able to not use these people, but get to know these people to understand her family's past. So
Gotcha.
she's, this is sort of the first time I think that she's not with her mother, who's been like blocking every situation of like learning about her past. So
Gotcha.
she's sort of trying to gauge him.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the age difference?
There's not, I think maybe a year or so.
Okay.
She's 21. He may be, 21,
Gotcha.
22,
Is
according, to the
is there
story right now.
like romantic attraction going on?
Um, there could be flirtation. I don't want to give away too much.
Okay, that's totally fine. You don't have to.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was
But
just
he's
making sure.
very friendly,
Gotcha.
and she's drawn to that.
So when I first read it, I was reading her as a teenager and him as an old man.
Oh,
And this scene was really creepy.
I need to work on description then.
I was like, oh no, Kaylin, we can't have this teenager flirting with this old man.
No, no, no.
It might have been because I was right before I read it, I was watching Glee with my teenage daughter. And there was a scene where Rachel in Glee was flirting with the choir director, and so
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
read this, and I was like, "Oh no, it's happening here too."
No, no. In the previous chapter, they've already met once before.
Gotcha. So we
Yeah.
know who he is. So you're doing some things here that communicate to me like her romantic entanglement with him.
Okay.
And a lot of that is about where she's focusing, right? Like, so focusing on facial features, focusing on smells, these like intimate details of somebody, especially if they're pleasurable, communicate like I'm attracted to this person. And I love how you're doing it. So there's just like a couple things in here that are really a couple like short sentences you're using that I think pull that out really well. Like a smile curves his lips, right? Like focusing on the mouth region, especially, is very like romantic and engaging. Brings that like intimacy out. He chokes on a laugh. Again, draws us to like his throat and mouth. The scent of mint radiates from him, right? Like that, again, like pulls us in close to him and communicates that like deep intimacy with him.
Mm-hmm.
So I really loved how you were doing that. And I loved this scene altogether where she's going back and forth with him while he's fixing the sink. And she's what's great is you have this tension inside of her that I think is really hard to pull off, where she wants to have this like engaging moment with him, and at the same time she's terrified of the vision she had and what's going to happen. So if we just read their dialogue together, it comes out really nice, right? Good morning. uh he says, you just let yourself in, huh? Which is that like great kind of like flirtatious um back and forth, where she's kind of teasing him. And he's like, I didn't want to bother you. Not at all, you're helping me. um and then he's where he says, I know, I know you said you saw something, but I've been looking for a few minutes and I don't see it. So I push closer and then she smells him, which is that like great kind of intimacy moment. And she's like, it's right there. Maybe it moved to the side. So what's great about that like dialogue back and forth is that she's engaging and like pushing in. She's teasing him, which is a way that we tend to engage with people. She's moving closer to him. She's she's engaging in what he's doing, and he's all work. So
Hmm.
what I love about that is it, it creates, not only are we seeing her wanting to engage, which in a second she starts to pull back as she has this vision, internally, but not externally. But we see him all work, so it leaves this mystery of their relationship. Like, how is this? How does he feel about her, and how does she feel about him? It's something you do in your work all the time that I really love. Is this? You're really great at like taking the uh, motivations of two characters and having them contrast to leave us as readers questioning what's going to happen next.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's really nicely done here.
Thank you.
I thought it was awesome. Um, yeah, let me scroll down. The last kind of third part I wanted to talk about that's more technical is, oh, I have a kid in here. Is excuse the child running around in the background. Is first person POV and dialogue. So talk to me a little bit about why you choose first person to write in.
Um, I don't really know. Like, it's one of those things that sort of comes to me when the story comes to me. And also, like, I've only written one book other than this one in present tense.
Okay,
It was just the way the story came out.
nice.
Part of the reason I think I did first person with this one, now that I'm thinking about it more, is because of her, what she experiences.
Hmm,
Like, I wanted more of the internal, like actually seeing that. I'm sure I could do that in third person, but I really wanted to feel close. I wanted it um, to just be really like in it for the reader.
gotcha.
Like every single second is in her head.
Yeah, what I like about what you're doing with this first person is that, like, first person and dial. I think of first person as the whole book needs to be a conversation with a reader. So I read a lot of first person work where the author feels like, oh, I can get away with, I'm doing first person because I can get away with a lot of inner thoughts. Um, which is totally true. Like what you're saying is like first person gives us that ability to get directly in their head, which is so, um, which is like the great strength of first person.
Hmm.
What I like about what you've done is you haven't lost her voice in the first person narrative. So a lot of times I'll read first person where the voice of the POV is just flat,
Hmm.
and you can feel Jenny's personality in her voice, which is really great. I like how you've done it. Uh, my The hard thing I find about first person is that we want to do the like Hemingway style dialogue where we just have back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And something we really need to, which is great because it reads really fast. There's no distractions. It totally like pulls us into the moment and like engages us real deeply in the conversation. Um, the problem with it in first person is that we can struggle to figure out who's talking,
Hmm.
and we can get lost in inner thoughts versus what's being said. So there's a lot of times where I'll read it and I'll be like, did she say that out loud or did she say that to herself?
Yeah.
So just like my recommendation is as you move through, so like right here is a place where I got lost, right?
Okay.
Scott's forehead glistens with sweat. The house is warm, but I'm not sure if the interrogation is pressuring him too much. I'm so close. I can feel it. Have you heard anything about your aunt from your mother? I don't, at first I was like, wait, did she say that or did he say that? Because we've got her speaking in this
Hmm.
first person, making that great like first person observation where she's like, you almost can picture her like telling the story to you as it's happening. Um, and then all of a sudden there's this utterance. So like making it clear. So I just added a line here that was like, he takes a deep breath, making
Hmm.
it clear that like he's about to talk, um, so that the reader can get that moment of like, oh, I'm watching someone else now. I'm not in her head anymore. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I did notice that too when I was going over the other piece that we worked on. There were moments of like that type of dialogue where I was like, wait, I know who's talking, but I need to like add that for the reader. So that's
Yeah.
definitely like a good reminder for me.
Yeah, and we definitely want to make that thing like I think what's hard about that Hemingway dialogue is that it's so great because again, like it just pulls you right in. But we definitely want to make it clear who's speaking because we don't want is that like catch where the reader has to like stop and go like, wait a second, and then go back and read. And then, because then we're breaking that connection that we've worked so hard to build. So,
Yes.
just being able to continue that through line. I I like that you're not using a lot of italics. That makes me really happy. I'm just gonna say that. Um, I don't like. For me, the italics as a reader tells me like, hey, you don't. This is secondary. You don't have to pay attention to this. Um, so I like that you're keeping her inner thoughts just in prose and in narration. I think it's great. Uh, yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Nice.
I know a lot of authors will to try and keep that Hemingway back and forth going. They'll use italics for inner thought, and the problem with that in a first-person POV is that when are you using italics and when are you not using italics? Because if you're in first-person POV and you're using italics for inner thought, really the whole book should be in italics
Yeah,
because
exactly.
the whole thing is her inner thought. So yeah, just avoiding that. I think you've done a really great job here of avoiding that crutch by giving this like uh just her running conversation about what's happening. So like you continue on here, ruminating over it. I can't believe that all I know about my mother's sister. As an only child, I never wanted to rely on anyone either, but it would be nice to have a sisterly bond with another person. Maybe I could maybe I wouldn't feel so alone if the world had had a sibling. So like that her inner thought about like what was going on with her mother and her sister and like people missing and all that um is something that you could have put in italics to like designate or like I thought to myself or like put it in quotations, but just keeping it in that prose I think is really effective for the first person POV. And going back to what I was saying earlier about because I said I would reference it down lower about keeping her voice and her personality. You can still feel, even in her running thought, you can still feel that tension she has as a character between like the world she knows or the world of her visions and the world she wants, or like the comfort of just being present without this constant fear, right? Like, so even in these like off paragraphs, you're maintaining that voice, which I think is really, really great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about cops. Um,
That's why I
and
wanted to do this specific scene with you because I'm like, you're the best.
yeah, so when we're writing an authority figure like a police officer or an FBI agent, there's two things we have to think about in general that's going to determine their tone. So, right, like if we're doing the dialogue Daisy and we have like, okay, here's my central character, and then I'm modulating the voices and all the pedals. The pedals for authority figures are determined as much about who they're with and where they are as they are about how they're feeling. Because when you put on that uniform, you're putting on a persona, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and you're entering into a fraternity, right? Like the uniform is a statement of fraternity. I am part of this group and my profession defines me. And it's not just police officers, right? Like that goes for like firefighters in gear or doctors in white coats, right? Like any profession that has a uniform you put on, that uniform projects a persona, and that persona becomes one of those pedals on the daisy that you're modulating into. So for cops, a lot of there's insiders and outsiders, right? Those that are inside are people that are inside that fraternity, immediate family, other police officers inside that fraternity. So that's when they're going to let down their guard. That's when they're going to be vulnerable. That's when they're going to share personal information, right? Like is when they feel comfortable with insiders. In this scene, the cop is only talking to outsiders.
Okay.
So you're not going to learn much about the cop from what the cop says, right? You're only going to face the persona. You're, in essence, you're talking to the uniform
Mm-hmm.
because the cop is, you know, speaking to people that are not inside the fraternity. So the cop isn't going to share any personal details. The cop isn't going to give any like offhanded insights. So like at one point in here, the cop and Jenny's confronted by a teenager and whose mother is missing, and the cop comes and intercedes because the teenager starts screeching help loudly because she's accusing Jenny of things. And then when Jenny leaves, the cop makes a comment on Jenny. Not on Jenny, I'm sorry. When the teenager Z leaves, the cop makes a comment on Z. That's that kind of like relational thing that might happen between two adults dealing with a teenager that's not going to happen because the cop is actually just the persona of the uniform when she's dealing with strangers. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. That's
Yeah.
very
So
helpful.
we got to like modulate into that like wall. The second thing we need to consider when we're talking about modulating a cop's voice is where are they? So, and before we do a cop, let's do a surgeon, right? Like a surgeon in a white coat in the break room with a bunch of nurses has one persona, right? Because of where they are. They're in the break room, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot going on there. They don't necessarily need to be on. They're out of the eyes of the public. There's no patients around. So they may let down their guard a little bit. They may reveal a little bit more of their personality. So if this doctor's a complete jerk or an ass, they'll probably be more of a jerk in the break room, right? Like if the doctor's, fun loving and McSteamy connecting with everybody, then the doctor's going to be more charming and let more of that go in the break room behind where the patients aren't, where people aren't watching. When we move the doctor out into the waiting room where the doctor's talking to patients, they can still be a jerk, but their voice is going to modulate down and the white coat is going to take over.
Okay.
Right. Like, and so McSteamy can still be hot in the waiting room, but McSteamy is not going to be charming and flirtatious in the waiting room.
Right.
Because in the waiting room, McSteamy recognizes like this is a situation that I need to control or that I need to like be on high persona for. Like I need to be highly aware of what's happening and who I am, because right now I'm not with an insider and I'm in a location that in some ways is dangerous for a doctor, right? That's where a doctor can screw up and get himself sued. That's where a doctor can offend a patient. That's where a doctor can ruin a relationship, right? Like, so the doctor needs to be on to have this difficult conversation in the waiting room. So it's not just about insiders and outsiders. It's also about location and where they are and do they feel safe or not. So for a cop in public breaking up a scene, that cop is their goal is to stay in control, right? So I was watching because if they lose control, things get dangerous for them, for people around them. So their goal is to be in control. So like I was watching a Twitter moment today where a cop was arresting a man in front of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And there's people around the man asking, why are you arresting him? Why, like, leave him alone? Why are you arresting him? Because it appears that, I don't know the facts of what happened, but from the video, it looks like this guy's just being arrested for no reason. And the cop is closed to communication with everyone around him, and he's doubling down, tripling down on what he's doing. And I'm watching it and I'm like, he's in a, like, this is a dangerous situation because he's focused on controlling the circumstances around him and not aware of how he's being seen, and not able to step back and ask himself what's actually happening, right? Like unable for self-reflection because he's so concerned about controlling this moment. The moment you're describing here is one of those.
Okay.
Because they're in public. There's a teenager that the cop knows to be volatile screaming at a stranger. The cop knows some things about the stranger already, which makes her quasi suspicious, right? So this is a moment of control, which means the cop is never going to let go of control of the conversation. The minute the cop intercedes, the cop is going to be the one asking questions. The cop is going to be the one making declaratory statements. And the cop isn't going to allow the other person they're talking to take control. So if the other person asks a question, the cop's going to answer it and follow it with what the cop wants to happen, right? Because the cop's in charge. So let me see if I can find an example real quick. Yeah, so right here, Z, hands falls to her waist, digging into her jeans, trying to squeeze the life out of them. You had written, you of all people think it's strange that another person goes missing when they return here. She points her finger at me. So Z's making an accusation at Jenny, but talking to the cop and being like, you of all people should know that this woman's sketchy and that you need to deal with her. And then you had the cop say, don't you need to get to your volunteer job? Which is nice and like diffusing of the situation, but maybe not realistic to what the cop is going to do in this moment, because the cop needs to take charge of what's happening and take charge of what's going on before she can diffuse. So, I just added this phrase. I'm not talking about this with you right now. The cop doesn't need to be mean, but she needs to make the declaratory statement of, I'm in control of this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in control of this setting. I'm not talking. And now she can say, don't you need to get to your volunteer job? Right? Like, in asserting that commanding presence. And again, it's about setting. So if you were to take Z and Jenny and move them to the station in an interrogation room, now the setting gives the cop control. Right? It's one of the reasons that like cops don't question people typically in the street. They're like, let's go back to the station, because the setting changes the power dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And now that you're in an interrogation room, the cop can be more relaxed, can be more in control. They know what's happening in the environment. They can say things like, they can be a little more playful. They can build a little bit more rapport. They can work on their relationship with you, right? Like they can let you talk, let you rant, let you think that you have control of the conversation, let you move through questions, right? Like, so all that to say, like, if you wanna, if this cop is going to be a main character, Davina Hooker, in the book, then be aware of the settings she's in and modulate her voice based on how in control she feels of the moment, because it is that, like, putting on that badge and that uniform that creates this persona, and the persona kind of manipulates her voice modulation. Does that make sense? That was
I love that. Yes, that's very helpful, because there are different scenes with people in law enforcement and different settings. So that would be so helpful.
Yeah. And in police officers' defense, because I don't want to come off being like, hey, they're control freaks. The reason for that focus on control and diffusing, and often diffusing with strength, is that often in their jobs they feel endangered. So
Mm-hmm.
it's about self-protection, right? Like, so there's a and if anybody really wants to get into this, Malcolm Gladwell had a fantastic book about it, about miscommunication, and it's called Talking with Strangers. Super painful book, because he examines lots of really difficult conversations where the because of the power dynamics, things went wrong.
Mm.
And really the book is kind of a guide to, like, hey, when you're talking to other people, be aware of the power dynamics at the moment, because it'll help you get the result you want, or at least foresee the inevitable result, right? Like, if Z continues to push here and doesn't go to her job, the inevitable result is that she's handcuffed in a car.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because at some point the police officer will just assert authority, and in order to stay in control of the moment, right? Like, so Talking with Strangers really breaks it down, and I super recommend the audiobook, because in the audiobook he plays scenes that he's describing,
Oh, really?
so you actually hear it, uh, And the audiobook's 10 times more painful because you hear a cop unjustly arrest and abuse a person.
Oh,
And
jeez.
Gladwell keeps stopping the tape to talk about why that's happening. What's happening in the cop's head, what's happening in the woman's head, what's going on, and the power dynamics at play, not justifying the cop's behavior, but just explaining, being like, hey, this is his thinking that's leading to this massive injustice. And then he plays the internal affairs investigation of the tape of that the cop has after this woman has died, and the interplay between those police officers and how they all describe the setting and what their internal language is about it, and why they play it down, and like why they just let this massive injustice slide. Like, so it's really great for understanding power dynamics and conversations. But
Hmm.
it is, just be warned, it's not an easy read. It's super painful. Um, yeah. Anyway, so that's the cop. Anything else you want to talk about or explore with like authority and police officers and personas?
No, I mean you described it very. I'm able to visualize it now, like having the cop in the situation, because there's multiple. She's in situations where she's like in someone's home
Mm.
and then at the station, and that really informs how I can, modulate her a bit.
Yeah,
So that definitely helps.
great. And it goes for anybody in a uniform,
Hmm.
right? Like athletes, when they put on the uniform, modulate their voice with the uniform on, right? Like the classic, the famous basketball player Larry Bird, with the uniform off, was always like jovial and friendly, and people were like, "Oh, Larry Bird's so nice." But then you talk to people that played him, like Magic Johnson or Michael Jordan, and they were like, "Yeah, the minute that uniform came on, he was talking trash the whole game. He was mean and like nasty and in your head the whole game." And the uniform is what gives that persona power, right? Like the uniform comes on and you feel like a different person. Or for people writing superheroes, um, the uniform comes on and that voice modulates, right? Like suddenly there's somebody else. The TV show The Boys does a great job with that when those superheroes are in public. And again, graphic show, definitely a strong R. So don't go don't go watch it if you're not prepared. But they put the superheroes put that uniform on and get in public, and all of a sudden power dynamics and control dynamics are really important for their persona. They take the uniform off, they can be more themselves, and they can kind of hide in public. And yeah, it's an interest. They do it. The writers of that show do a great job with it.
Nice.
um, okay, let's talk about Z's voice and the teen voice here. um, Z is explosive, and she's angry, and she's manipulative,
Yes.
which is great. It makes for a really fun teenager. Um, so I think I thought you did a really great job with Z. I had less notes for Z's voice. So just some thoughts in general. Well, what are you thinking of when you're writing a teenager?
Just trying to sound authentic. I'm well past teenager age, and I don't have a teenager, so
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
I tease my kids all the time that I'm fat and 40. They need to cut me a break. Like, yeah,
but at least you have them. Like the discussion we had about the other project helps so much, just in terms of like really getting into their heads about, you know, the power dynamics between them, the things that they say.
yeah,
Um, this is a small, very, very small town. So I was trying to like, there's not going to be as much. She doesn't have a lot of money, so there's not going to be. There's just different dynamics, I guess,
mhm.
in my head for her. So I wanted to make sure she sounded authentic.
Yeah. So that hyper, like teenagers tend to be hyper aware of their social constructs or hyper unaware. So, like my 17-year-old boy, um, that no, he's not a good example. He's hyper aware. My 13-year-old boy is hyper unaware. He has
Hmm.
no clue. what's happening around him at any given time, and isn't necessarily aware of what other people are thinking or feeling. Whereas my teenage daughter and my older teenage son are constantly reading people and judging their own behavior in response to the people around them. So there's kind of this like hyper. The other thing I think we need to keep in touch with teenagers, especially when we're like in our middle teens, we're writing teens in our middle teens, is the surge of hormones that are happening and how that plays into uh emotions and how they deal with those emotions. So there's like
Mhm.
kind of those three levels of like they're having emotions that are new in some ways to them and are like that they're dealing with for the first time, and they don't always know how to handle or comprehend. So they're going to have a reaction to those emotions, and that reaction is actually their voice.
Mhm.
So like Z's reaction seems to be anger and outbursts. She has an emotion, she sees Jenny, she immediately has this surge of grief over her missing mother, of anger over the fact that no one's doing anything about it. And so that emotion translates into this dramatic outburst at this stranger,
Mhm.
right? Um, this when we come to the fight or flight mechanism, Z's going to fight, right? Like she's
Yeah.
coming at her. Other teens might flee, right? Like you may not get this explosive. They may like follow the stranger from afar and watch them and not. And again, it's this like compulsory reaction to the emotions they don't know how to deal with. And so like that's the behavior is that translation of emotion. Um, so I think you did a great job with Z getting to that anger. If you bring Z back and you want somebody to connect with her, the way to connect with a teenager with outbursts like this is to allow the outburst to happen and be patient through it,
Mhm.
and then connect to the emotion under the outburst, because that's what's really going on. So like if you wanted this cop to not behave like a cop and to behave more like a therapist in the moment, which in a small town, if she's the only cop in the office, a lot of times they take on that role. So the cop in Stranger Things is a great example of this, right? He's more a town therapist as like the sole sheriff of the town than he is your traditional police officer, because he's got a real small fraternity, but it's pretty much just him. Like we learned that real quick, like, oh, you're really the only guy here. And so he's got this like small town sheriff thing where he's more um, engaging with people as a counselor. So a counselor persona with Z would have more of these moments where she's like, all right, Z, get it all out. Are you done? You got a little bit more? Okay. I know that uh, this sucks right now and that you miss your mom. And then Z's going to yell again because the emotions come back up. And then the counselor's going to be like, I get it. I get it. And why don't you and I talk about this a little bit later? And then Z's going to like say something mean. And the counselor's going to be like, there's no reason to be mean to strangers. Right. But why don't you head back into your job? I'll come check on you in a minute. I'll come right back. Go on in. I'll check on you in a minute. Right. Like, so for the counselor persona, you want to remove that like fear of control, because the small town sheriff, if she's the only one there, there's not that insider fraternity. She's more like this, a pastor of the city type thing. Uh, but then you've got to slow this whole scene way down, and you need to give her time to invest in Z's anger outburst.
Okay.
You got to give Z more time to yell and scream. If we're talking about like the fatal flaw of the yelling and screaming teen, is they push people away that internally they really want to draw close, right? So they start feeling that emotion and they start yelling and pushing away when what they really want is for that person to like grab them and hold them.
Mhm.
But they don't know how to deal with that internally, so they're just like yelling and pushing away. Their defense mechanism is that pushing. Um, and if we're going the more like if you go the more counselor route with the sheriff, uh, the fatal flaw of that like small town sheriff is that they let stuff slide that they shouldn't because they're so busy being counselors.
Mm-hmm.
So they're so busy like, and they know everybody, so they always assume that everything's okay, right? Like in literature, that's the fatal flaw of the small town sheriff is they're like, that's just Billy. Billy, I've known Billy since he was a little kid and it's no big deal. And Billy's fine. And, but like Billy's actually like, stabbing people. So
Yeah.
like that tends to be the fatal flaw of that small town sheriff persona. But anyway, I liked Z. I think she's fun. Uh, and again, like if you're going to use her a lot, and you want the reader to relate to her, at some point, someone's going to have to break down her persona and let the reader connect with her. Otherwise, she's just going to always feel like a rage monster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Anyway, that's any other thoughts on writing teens? You do it really well.
Oh, thanks. I don't ever feel like I do, but thank you. um, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like all those notes. I definitely have to go over this again after and tweak a little. And Davina is, I think she's partially that counselor role, which I like, which I want to insert as well. But
Yeah.
I do want to also take the information you've given about the uniform and the modulations and.
Yeah, and I think part of that would, for me, Caitlin, would be like, where do I want this character to go, and like where do I want her? How's she interacting with the plot? Right? If she's gonna miss stuff and let stuff slide, go the like familiar counselor.
Mm-hmm.
If she's gonna be too much of a hard ass and sometimes impede the progress of what's happening, go the uniform persona. Right? Like based on how you want this, base her characterization on how you want this side character to serve the plot. If
Okay.
she's an ally, maybe the counselor role. If she's a like side antagonist, not necessarily the villain, but somebody who's like creating obstacles in the way, even if they're well-meaning obstacles, go the uniform route, right? Like it's your call as to
Mm-hmm.
which way you take her. But I'd take her, however she's going to best serve the plot. That's how I'd drive her.
Yeah, that's great. That definitely gives me something to think about in terms of other um, pieces as well when it comes to these types of characters.
Yeah. Now, and the ending here, where like just talking about Davina and how she'd play out in this role, the reason that I naturally went for the cop persona is because Davina starts giving commands to Jenny at the end about where Jenny's supposed to go and what she's supposed to do. So that's the cop. The
Yeah.
counselor's not going to care. The counselor's going to be like, all right, well, stay out of trouble. See you around. If you need something, I'm over there. Right. Like, so, but she's like, I don't, why don't you go on your way now? Go on home. Get
Yeah.
out of here. Right. Like, that's the whole like badge persona authority pushing out. Whereas, and it plays really well here at the end because Jenny's like, I really want to go in the library, but I don't think I can. Right. So it's not like,
She's
which
the
was,
one where Z fights. Jenny's the one who would normally run away.
yeah. Oh, and
So
it's
yeah, yeah.
perfect. And if you pair them in the book, it's a really great pairing. But before you can pair them, Jenny's going to have to patiently break through Z's anger
Mm-hmm.
because Z's not going to trust people who don't see the internal over the external, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like with my daughter, she doesn't have outbursts like Z. She's pretty level headed, but she does have at times the teenage like um, disdain and
Mm-hmm.
disgust, especially for when I say stupid things. Um, and so a lot of times I have to kind of like take a step back and think like, okay, what's happening internally there? And a lot of times I'll have to ask her, I'm like, hey, you look really frustrated. And she's like, I'm not frustrated. I'm like, okay, what's going on the inside? Like, talk to me about because the exterior looks this way, but what's happening inside right now? And so, it gives her an opportunity to like actually communicate and explore her feelings. And it's in those moments that we really connect, right? Like, where I can push past uh, the walls that she's putting up to deal with the emotions she's feeling, and help her process those. So Jenny and Z are going to have that moment if they're going to partner up
Mm-hmm.
in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like how I must have done it, not on purpose, but Davina knows Z.
Yeah.
She's that I've
That's
known you your
very
whole life,
clear.
the
Yeah.
counselor, and then not knowing Jenny, I must have just done the switch without really like understanding why, and that's why she's putting on the cop persona and like you can move on now,
Yeah.
because she doesn't know her as well.
And that does work.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like giving it, I think you need to go hard in one or the other. It's going to
Okay.
serve you better.
Okay.
Especially with a side character. If Davina Hooker was who the book was about, and you were inside Davina's head, and you could see what Davina was processing when she was like changing persona so quickly in a scene, you could totally pull that off.
Okay.
But because we don't have access to Davina's thoughts, I would make her more monochromatic.
Okay.
Yeah. I would send her one way or the other, because otherwise she's gonna feel schizophrenic. Like she's gonna feel
Mm-hmm.
mysterious, and if it happens too much, schizophrenic.
Yeah.
And so, like, man, she just doesn't like some people and likes others, right? Like, unless you want to put a space in here where Jenny tries to like jump into the conversation, and Davina's like, no, I don't know you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, if you want to keep that contradiction, we need a moment where we get insight into what's happening in Davina's head and why she's treating the two people differently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. Yep.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
All right, that's all I had. Did you had was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, you've given me so much to think about.
Awesome. It's a
As
great
usual.
piece. I'm excited to read the book. It's really great.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully soon.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording.
Yeah.
Thanks, and we can talk a little bit, but thanks for hanging out with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.